This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China and the U.S. say they'll work to manage their differences as senior officials meet face-to-face. The World Health Organization approves the first vaccine against malaria, calling it a breakthrough. And rooting for RUMBA, where the two Congos want RUMBA music on UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, the U.S. faces a catastrophe. Lawmakers do not suspend the limit before October 18. And in sport, Egypt sweep up the U.S. Open squash titles in Philadelphia. We begin the program in Zurich, where senior Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi met with U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Both agreed to restore China-U.S. relations. They also agreed to uphold the consensus reached by President Xi Jinping and Joe Biden during their phone call in September, namely managing differences and avoiding conflict. Li Jianhua reports.
In the Zurich meeting this time, both sides agreed to continue speaking at a senior level, and Yang said that China has noticed the good relations between the world's two largest economies are beneficial to the two peoples and the world as a whole. And China is opposed to defining the relations between the two nations as a rivalry or competition. Yang said that China has noticed the positive attitudes of the Biden administration recently, and the U.S. does not intend to contain China's development and create a new Cold War. Compared with the heated discussions between Yang and Sullivan in March and June, as we all remember, this time the discussions between the two sides saw less drama and with more frank exchanges. But does it necessarily mean that the relationship between the two nations is looking up? Earlier, I talked to an expert.
People are wondering if China-U.S. relations are warming up now. Warm is not yet the right word. Presently, perhaps there's just a little defrosting, a little less ice. Let's get to the point where we're not on the brink of more conflict. Let's see real progress on normalizing trade. Let's see sincere cooperation on vital issues like the pandemic, climate change, security, and so on. Then let's talk about warmth, if not a new friendship.
The meeting comes after U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai laid out the White House's China trade policy. Let's bear that in mind. Tai said that China failed to meet some of the commitments in the two nations' Phase 1 trade deal and sounded pessimistic that the situation would change without a hard line. But whether the two sides are lowering the trade tariffs was not revealed in the talks this time. I guess we have to wait until the talks between China's top officials pretty soon.
Well, the talks mark the third high-level face-to-face meeting between the two countries since Biden took office. Officials also met in Alaska in March and in July during a visit by U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. The two-day Alaska meeting was opened with a heated exchange. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged Beijing to return to what he called a rules-based system, while Yang Jiechi hit back at Washington's criticisms of China's internal and foreign policies. In July, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with the Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman in China's Tianjin. Wang demanded the U.S. not obstruct China's development and violate China's sovereignty or territorial integrity. He also called for settling differences through talks. Sherman said the two countries should rise above their differences to work on global issues. She insisted the U.S. does not want to contain China's development. Now, the World Health Organization has approved a vaccine to protect against malaria. They're calling it a breakthrough in the fight against a parasite that kills hundreds of thousands of people each year. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich reports.
Today, the RTSS malaria vaccine, more than 30 years in the making, changes the course of public health history.
The head of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, says this is a game changer, not only for science, but those most affected by the disease.
This vaccine is a gift to the world, but its value will be felt most in Africa because that's where the burden of malaria is greatest.
The WHO says there were 229 million cases in 2019, and it killed 409,000 that same year. They say children under the age of 5 accounted for 67% of those deaths, and Africa made up 94% of cases and deaths in 2019. Malawi was the first of 3 African countries to take part in a pilot program testing the vaccine on children. It meant a world of difference to those who had dealt with it firsthand.
Malaria is a dangerous disease. When I saw how ill my husband was from malaria, I was concerned that if my children got ill from malaria, it would be much worse for them. I don't want my child to suffer from malaria. That is why my child is getting the malaria vaccine.
Kenya and Ghana also took part in the program. Over 800,000 children were vaccinated with Mosquirix. The results found it to be 30% effective. That seems low compared with others, such as those for polio. Health experts say they are looking at the vaccine as another chink in malaria's armor.
I always remember when 30 years ago, we, as many others, were developing insecticide-treated bed nets, they were met with similar skepticism. But data showed that they could actually have a massive impact on mortality. And as such, they've become the cornerstone, the backbone of our malaria control efforts that have resulted in over 7 million deaths being averted.
Challenges lie ahead in getting this vaccine out. It means delivering it to the most remote parts of a massive continent. But for the WHO, it's worth the cost to save lives. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
Well, that news is certainly a game changer, particularly for Africa. Let's bring you more on this from the WHO. Joining us is Dr. Kalu Akpaka, team leader for the Tropical and Vector-Borne Diseases Program at the World Health Organization's Regional Office for Africa. Dr. Akpaka is joining us from Abuja in Nigeria. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. Of course, this is very big news for Africa, but let's talk through the details of the WHO's report. This is, after all, a pilot vaccine with just 30% effectiveness. Tell us why, so far, this has been the only approved malaria vaccine.
Thank you very much. And indeed, we are exhilarated in Africa that eventually, after decades, we have a vaccine that works, a vaccine that saves life, an addition to the toolkit for malaria in Africa. And answering your question directly, we believe that one more child saved from malaria-related death is one child that ought to live. Therefore, even though malaria, we use a series of imperfect tools, the vaccine is an addition to that armamentarium, and we hope to use it to save lives, to prevent malaria. It's a welcome addition, even as we look forward to the future, to more tools being added to the malaria toolkit.
Well, Doctor, as you say, the vaccine is just another element of the arsenal that we use across the continent to fight malaria. But with roughly, 400,000 malaria deaths a year, how soon and how quickly do you see the rollout of this vaccine taking place in Africa?
Like you know, this vaccine is already being used in some districts in Ghana, in Kenya, and in Malawi. Expanding to other areas is priority. Given supply situations, we hope that in the next 1-2 years, country after country will begin to roll out this vaccine. We want to save lives. No child, no person ought to die from malaria, because malaria is treatable, malaria is preventable.
Indeed. Well, let's talk then about saving those lives. What kind of impact do you expect this vaccine to have on malaria infections and malaria deaths on the continent once it's fully rolled out?
Just think about 4 out of 10 malaria deaths being saved. The impact is unimaginable in the sense that the 400,000 deaths that occur in Africa every year due to malaria, most of them, 70% of them in children. We are saying if these children are vaccinated, the likelihood that they have a better fighting chance of survival is very high. And we are saving lives. And that is why we ought to deploy this vaccine as soon as possible. And that is why those of us whose responsibility it is have vowed to support countries to adopt these vaccines, to roll out these vaccines as soon as possible. Luckily, Africa is very experienced at introducing new vaccines. All countries in Africa, we are introducing COVID vaccine right now, rolling it out. It's the same platform that will be deployed because the malaria vaccine is being deployed through the EPI structure. The EPI structure has been existing for 2-3 decades in many countries. Therefore, we are optimistic that the systems to roll out this vaccine is there and that there will be rapid expansion in malaria endemic areas of Africa.
Indeed, certainly very, very groundbreaking indeed for the continent. Thank you so much, Dr. Kalu Akpaka, team leader for the Tropical and Vector-Borne Diseases Program at the WHO's Africa Regional Office. Now, in other news, the United Nations, or rather Mohamed Biavogu, has been appointed as Guinea's new Prime Minister. Interim President Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya named the development veteran in a decree read on public television. Biavogu has held a prestigious career with international organizations, including the UN, but has no national government experience. This distances him from the Ghanaian political infighting of recent years. The 68-year-old is an engineering graduate and an expert in agricultural development financing and risk management. Following a coup earlier this month, Interim President Doumbouya vowed to help steer the country forward, and the appointment of a PM was one of his promises. The United Nations Secretary General has called on Ethiopia to allow the distribution of humanitarian aid to millions in the country without hindrance. Also, while speaking at a Security Council meeting, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said Ethiopia's decision to expel 7 UN officials violated international law. Reporting from the UN headquarters in New York, here's William Denslow.
The UN Secretary-General warned the Security Council back in August that a humanitarian catastrophe was unfolding in Ethiopia. Speaking to the Security Council on Wednesday, Antonio Guterres said the crisis had worsened. The UN estimates up to 7 million people in Tigray, Amhara and Afar are in need of food assistance and other humanitarian support. In Tigray alone, he warns that around 400,000 people are living in famine-like conditions. Members of the Security Council reiterated the Secretary-General's call for unhindered humanitarian access. The situation on the ground has deteriorated since the conflict between Ethiopia's military and the Tigray People's Liberation Front began nearly a year ago. The US Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, says it's not too late to stop the spiral of violence, but stressed that lives are on the line, and now is the time for the international community to step up. Ethiopia's representative defended the country's recent decision to expel 7 UN officials, accusing them of making false allegations. In a rebuttal, the Secretary-General said the move was not in line with international law and asked the Ethiopian government to provide proof of their alleged transgressions. Antonio Guterres concluded by saying that the UN had only one agenda, that's to stop the suffering of the Ethiopian people. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
Let's go to Mozambique now, where insurgents are recruiting young children to fight in the country's northern volatile oil-rich province of Cabo Delgado. This, according to the United Nations Children's Fund. The UN agency said it has received numerous reports of children being forcefully recruited by the Mozambican militant group Al-Shabaab. Now, the group is not affiliated with the Somali insurgency by the same name. The militant group in Mozambique has reportedly taken boys and girls from their families and villages. UNICEF has noted evidence of sexual violence against girls and of young girls being forced into marriage with their abductors. Now, according to Human Rights Watch, boys, some as young as 12, are being trained in bases across Cabo Delgado. Boys are reportedly forced to fight alongside adults against government forces. Well, our correspondent Angelo Coppola has been covering the conflict in Mozambique. He joins us now live from the Eastern Cape in South Africa. Angelo, very disturbing news coming out from UNICEF. Tell us more about these concerns over the recruitment of children by the militant group.
Well, look, according to Human Rights Watch, the armed group known locally as Mashalabos, they've abducted hundreds of boys, in fact. There's also talk of girls being abducted. In Palma, parents are saying that they watched their sons wield guns and when they returned to the village with other fighters to raid that particular village that he was born in, or that they were born in. The organization says it spoke by phone with 4 parents of kidnapped boys, a former child soldier and 2 witnesses to the abuses. Now, in 2021, that's in June of 2021, the humanitarian organization Save the Children estimated that insurgents had abducted at least 51 children. Most of them were girls, and that was over the past year. UNICEF said that the recruitment and use of children, as they put it, in armed conflict is in violation of international law, and all recruited for purposes of war should be treated as victims. There are also now reports of unverified video footage being found in an abandoned camp showing kids being trained and indoctrinated. Local media is now also reporting that the SADC, that's the SADC mission in Mozambique forces, were deployed to near Nangade region to rescue 7 women and girls that were abducted by insurgents last week. They were unsuccessful as those insurgents went into the forest. So it's a fluid situation at the moment, and it's very disturbing about the kids, especially the boys and the girls, being kidnapped to fight this war. Lindy?
Indeed, Angelo, it is a gross violation of international humanitarian law. But other news now coming out of this conflict is that the regional bloc SADC, who had sent troops whose deployment would have expired on October 15th. It is now understood that that deployment is being extended to help fight the insurgency there. Tell us about the impact of this deployment so far.
Well, look, the extension is for at least another 3 months. The analyst we spoke to says it's still early days in this military intervention. There have been some early successes, but they've been what they call so-called hanging or low-hanging fruit. The Rwandese forces are those responsible for most of those victories at the moment, but there is a concern that the 2 forces, that's the SADC forces and the Rwandese, aren't coordinating their activities at all, in fact. He's also concerned that the insurgents are being tactical and are using guerrilla tactics and adopting a wait-and-see approach, so they withdraw from camps to create the impression that they are withdrawing and retreating, only to come back stronger and to use ambush tactics to win back more ground. The extension, of course, of the deployment was expected, and it's more likely that the troops could be on the ground for at least another year, as far as we're told. Lindy?
Still a rather volatile situation. Thank you so much, Angelo Coppola, who is monitoring developments in Mozambique from neighboring South Africa. You are watching Africa Live. Time now for a short break. Coming up, rooting for Rumba, why the 2 Congos want Rumba music on UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Right, let's go to Uganda now, where farmers are doing their best to survive and thrive despite the COVID-19 pandemic disrupting food supply chains and causing price fluctuations. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga spent a day at a poultry farm in Kampala brings us this report.
Anthony Serunjoji is preparing to sell his eggs. He's been rearing chicken for 8 years now.
Try as much as possible to locate good suppliers of the ingredients. For example, the maize brand, the concentrates. Once you have a good, complete feed meal, the birds are going to enjoy it, and then they will give back just what you gave them. Your production levels will be better.
In a day, he collects about 120 trays of eggs.
Serunjoji rears about 7,000 birds here. He says keeping a sizable number of chicken and also stocking enough feeds has helped his business keep afloat during the pandemic.
He now wants to boost production, but finding a bigger market is still a challenge.
Right about now, it's not as easy to deliver our eggs to our biggest market, which was Kenya. So I would call for our government to make measures with these other fellow governments to help and solve this problem.
To address his concerns, the Uganda government is negotiating with Kenya to allow more imports from Uganda.
The state is coming in to look for markets and to organize companies to go and attend promotion events, to handhold them in these markets, to negotiate deals and hand it over to these companies, but also do what we call exporter aftercare.
The government has also created affordable loan schemes for farmers. Figures from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics show that 70% of Ugandans are involved in agriculture. With extra help, poultry farmers like Serunjoji are hoping not only to beat the effects of the pandemic, but also improve their incomes. Hilary Yesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has announced his new cabinet. Ahmed, who was sworn in on Monday, has included members from opposition parties. Abiy's party won the June election by a landslide, but he faces massive pressure over the situation in the northern Tigray region of the country. Here's CGTN's Gurum Chala with more.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's new cabinet members sworn in front of MPs to serve the nation for the next 5 years. Amongst them are 6 women ministers assigned to lead ministries such as health, transport and tourism. In his message to his new ministers, Abiy said fighting corruption and poverty begging must be their top job.
With the existence of corruption and begging, our country would not move an inch. You, the new ministers, must fight corruption and begging. Fight them at all cost. We aim to achieve self-sufficiency by walking away from awaiting for aid to come.
New to the country's political culture is the assignment of 3 opposition leaders into different ministries. Brahanu Naga, head of the Izema party, is given the Ministry of Education. Deputy head of the Oromo Liberation Front, Kajela Mardasa, has become Minister for Culture and Sports. Also, head of the Amhara National Movement, Belete Mola, leads the Ministry of Innovation and Technology.
Our political differences in Ethiopia cannot prevent us from sitting in the same cabinet or exchange our views in this parliament. Though we have different perspectives, we have to exercise working closely together for the good of our nation. We have got enough votes to form a government, but if we do that by including others, we will have a foundation for any future coalition government in this country.
Most positions in Abiy's cabinet have been laid by ministers who have served over the last 3 years. Most positions in Abiy's cabinet have been laid by ministers who have served over the last 3 years. One of the returnees is Deputy Prime Minister Demeke Mekonnen, who will continue serving with the addition of Ministry of Foreign Affairs into his mandate. Ethiopians expect better delivery from their newest government in almost all sectors, but more particularly a peaceful resolution of the conflict in the north, better economic growth and more jobs are what they want to see on the ground. Gurum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
On to the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo now. Authorities in the two countries have launched a campaign to have Congolese rumba added to the UNESCO list of intangible cultural heritage. Here's CGTN's Wanja Mongai with that story.
It is these electrifying sounds that drew rumba lovers to this local joint in the DRC's capital, Kinshasa. A blend of sounds from the saxophone, electric guitar, and the rich vocals make up rumba music. It is revered by many like Manda Shante, a Congolese rumba musician.
In fact, rumba has many characteristics. It existed for more than 50 years. I have lived my whole life with rumba. If you look at rumba now, we have developed and elevated it, although we have kept our references to the icon La Grande Calais, Papa Wemba, Simaro Masia, and Tabule.
This genre of music originated in Cuba among the enslaved black people. They combined their drum beats with melodies from Spanish colonizers.
Our ancestors were taken to the Americas in the 15th and 16th century and went to North America, Central America, or South America. But the focal point was Cuba in Central America. So in Cuba, there was a surprising mixture from those who came from Africa, but also from whom the slaves have encountered once there.
Il y a eu un mélange étonnant.
Re-exported back to Africa in the early 20th century, the Afro-Cuban music found a ready audience in the two Congos, who recognized the rhythms as their own.
Rumba is our creation. Rumba is us. Rumba is our life. Rumba is our vision. So rumba is us. That's why we want the rumba to be recognized as our own. It is our identity. Rumba is Congolese.
The DRC and neighboring Republic of Congo have launched a campaign to have Congolese rumba on UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List.
L'inscription veut dire une reconnaissance.
The registrations means the acknowledgement, and it is important that the whole humanity recognizes an element of the intangible heritage as an appropriation for humanity, so it becomes an asset that humanity will protect, will try to promote, and so on.
Bien que l'humanité va protéger.
UNESCO is supposed to announce its decision in November. In the meantime, Manda Shante will be entertaining revelers with the ever-electrifying rumba tunes. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
Well, how significant is this for the African continent and rumba lovers across the globe? Let's bring in Fred Obachi Machoka, a renowned TV and radio rumba music host. Fred joins us via Zoom from Kajiado in Kenya. Fred, welcome to Africa Live. Now, if there's one thing that unites the Congos and much of Africa, it is certainly rumba music. Tell us about the significance of this push to have rumba music listed as one of UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage.
Well, I think it's a good push, and Congo deserves every kind of compliment they can get for their contribution to rumba. Because Congo, much as it is not necessarily the origin of rumba, they have sustained the genre for decades, and they have been very consistent to the extent that they own now the rumba genre, just like Brazil owns football, whereas they did not necessarily invent football.
Indeed. And Fred, though, tell us, what is it about rumba music that has enabled this form of music to survive for so many decades, even as other styles come and go?
Well, I think consistency has been the main driving force, and the fact that rumba music, when you listen to most of rumba music, you will find that there is a message within it that resonates with the people. You will find that most rumba lyrics talk about societal issues, they talk about something to educate people, they talk about love, they talk about many things, and then they bring in a package that that makes you relax, because they are I mean, rumba music talks to you, talks to your brain, and the beat, and then there is the dancing style that also makes you feel like this is really a relaxation. And rumba seems to evolve without necessarily departing too much from the origin.
Well, Fred, you've presented Rumba shows for many years now. Do you think it is departing from the origin, in the sense that maybe younger artists are adapting the music somehow to change with the times?
I wouldn't say no, nor would I say yes. You see, rumba is a culture. It's like, you know, reggae is to Jamaica, for example. Every time you listen to rumba, it gives you a sense of belonging, and the drum beat and the horns and the entire arrangement smells Africa. And so that evolution that we see, that sort of people saying this is new. For me, as a DJ for over 4 decades, what I see is rumba being almost a roundabout. As you drive along a roundabout, you move to nowhere. The more you move forward is the more you dig backwards. It's like the fashion industry, you know, fashion wear, where people think that they are advancing, but there is a sense of going back at the same time.
Indeed.
That's what I see in rumba.
As they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same, and that's a good thing for rumba. Thank you so much, Fred Obacho Machoka, a well-known TV and radio rumba host. You are watching Africa Live. Your business news up next. Coming up, the U.S. faces a catastrophe if lawmakers do not suspend the federal debt limit before October 18. And Zimbabwe to establish gold processing and handling centers across the country by mid-2022.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
In your business news, the U.S. faces the risk of a historic default if it does not suspend the federal debt limit ahead of the approaching deadlines on October 18th. And that would crush the U.S. economy and financial markets across the world. At a White House event on Wednesday, President Joe Biden enlisted top business leaders to push for a change to the debt limit. The president shamed Republican senators for threatening to delay any suspension of the $28.4 trillion cap on the government's borrowing authority.
What does it mean for the small businesses and everyday people if we renege on the debt here?
We need to resolve this issue very quickly. Every day of delay right now comes at an increasing price, as we've begun to see in the markets already starting last Friday. America simply cannot default on the debt because the U.S. Treasury market is the bedrock of our financial system domestically and globally. And defaulting is going to cause lasting damage to the credibility of the United States with investors and in financial markets around the world.
This is an urgent matter. It must be resolved immediately. Treasury will exhaust its extraordinary measures if Congress has not acted to raise or suspend the debt limit by October 18th. After that point, we expect Treasury would be left with very limited cash that would be depleted quickly. And as we've seen in the past, and as this group knows, Even delaying action can cause harm to business and consumer confidence, raise borrowing costs, disrupt financial markets, and cause a downgrade of the U.S. credit rating.
The World Bank expects sub-Saharan Africa's economy to grow by 3.3% in 2021 and 3.5% in 2022. That's buoyed by rising commodity prices, the lifting of some anti-coronavirus restrictions, and a pickup in global trade. The 2021 projection represents a 1 percentage point upward revision from the bank's growth forecast of 2.3 to 3.4% in April. It now projects that faster vaccine deployment would accelerate the region's growth to 5.1% and 5.4% in 2023 as containment measures ease. Rather like elsewhere around the world, the sub-Saharan African region imposed restrictions on movement in the first quarter of last year to limit the spread of COVID-19. This, of course, impacted trade and other key economic activities, including tourism and transport. Let's go to Zimbabwe now. The country intends to establish gold processing and handling centers across the country by mid-2022. This is to plug suspected widespread smuggling of the precious metal out of the country. The centers will serve small-scale artisanal miners by providing a range of metallurgical services. Output from Zimbabwe's mining sector is forecast to grow by 11% this year. From Harare, here's CGTN's Farai Makutuya.
12.7 tons of gold were delivered to the national refinery during the first half of 2021, a figure many believe could have been much higher were it not for smuggling, which has been on the rise.
To account for the leakages through this is very difficult. However, I must say there are researches that have been done, and some point to more than $1 billion having been lost.
The government plans to set up one-stop service centers in areas where small-scale miners are concentrated to try to restrict the illicit movements.
In a way, it's incentivizing the miners because they don't have to worry about the transportation once they produce. Milling centers in designated areas will make sure those miners that I told you, artisanal miners, that are difficult to account for, it means we can account for them because they are in a protected area.
Apart from tightening the supply side, authorities are also addressing the market. The Zimbabwe Stock Exchange has signed an agreement with Dubai's Gold and Commodities Exchange to establish a gold exchange here.
One of the big things about the commodities exchange, which is very good at, is price discovery. Because remember, now it's a competitive market where you've got bidders from around the world coming to bid on the Zimbabwean gold. Our hope is that if we design this well, then anyone can come then onto that market to sell their gold, and they'll get their money straight away, and they're getting a competitive pricing.
Success depends on formalizing an industry that has been characterized by opaqueness.
There's thinking that you have almost like centers where informal people come to a center, and that center becomes the formalization. Then that center, or whoever runs that center, is the one that comes to the exchange.
ZSE officials believe that in addition to plugging leakages and getting a fair price for miners, the commodities exchange will also attract much needed foreign investment into the sector, which will help ramp up production, create jobs and bolster the economy. Farai Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Authorities in Tunisia have signed an agreement with the country's with the Tunisian Inclusive Labour Institute to help women working in the informal sector. The North African state is also providing financial support to thousands of women entrepreneurs whose businesses have been shattered by the COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi reports.
The Ministry of Women, Family and Seniors in Tunisia has announced that the state is aiming to boost the solidarity economy initiatives led by women throughout the country. In addition, the North African state's government will also help SMEs led by women to recover from the pandemic-induced fallout.
We'll support solitary women who want to work together in business groupings. This is part of the solidarity economy. The state will not abandon the women entrepreneurs who are forced to lay off employees. They need to get back to economic life and in good conditions.
Tunisian authorities provided around $8.8 million for the project of women empowerment in the business sector for the period between 2015 to 2020. The minister said the budget will increase for the 2021-2026 period.
Tunisian female startups are the target of our project. We supported 4,500 women over the past 5 years because both numbers and quantity are important. Now we are focused on the quality of the project. We'll support 3,000 women entrepreneurs. The funding will go up to $100,000 for each project.
Experts assert that Tunisia needs to work closely with female farmers and women entrepreneurs in the agricultural sector, which is a vital economic activity for the national economy.
The new project of women leaders provides technical and financial support to women who have invested in the agricultural sector. This was not possible in the past because the ministry's budget was limited. Now we have new partners, namely the Tunisian Solidarity Bank, the National Agricultural Bank, and the Bank for Financing Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises.
Tunisian women's rights activists and state organizations are working on strengthening women's rights and conditions for decent work. Authorities are also keen to support the rights of women working in unorganized and informal sectors. The Ministry of Women, Family and Seniors announced that her departments will launch several awareness campaigns on improving the conditions of women working in informal sectors. The ministry has also devised a strategy of supporting women refugees and migrants while facilitating access to microcredit. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
The Central Bank of Nigeria has released the regulatory guidelines for its digital currency, the e-Naira. The guidelines apply to all financial institutions and users of the digital currency. The e-Naira was due to be launched last Friday before the central bank suddenly announced its postponement. Here's CGTN's Deji Bademosi with more on that story.
Even though the Central Bank of Nigeria did not give any specific reason for the postponement of the much-anticipated launch of the e-Naira, reports say it was because of an unexpected surge in visits on the website of the e-Naira. At some point, the website recorded 1 million hits moments after going live. And that is a clear indication of the enthusiasm with which people have embraced this whole idea of the digital currency. Now, the central bank has gone ahead to issue a new set of regulatory guidelines on the e-Naira. The guidelines clearly stressed that the Naira stock wallet now belongs solely to the CBN and that the Apex Bank will be responsible for warehousing all minted e-Naira. Banks will be allowed to create their own wallets now, but it's actually the CBN that will administer the e-Naira through the digital currency management system. The guidelines also stipulate that users will be protected using two-factor authentication, and charges for e-Naira transactions will be in line with stipulated guides on charges. It's also important to note that financial institutions are required to comply with all money laundering and terrorism prevention act, as well as anti-laundering laws and regulations that may be issued by the CBN in the future. The CBN has also set up a consumer complaints desk where an e-Naira user can lay complaints to resolve any issue that may arise. For now, no new date has been announced for the launch of the e-Naira, but expectations are that it will happen very soon. Deji Bademosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
The United Kingdom is looking to recruit foreign truck drivers to help deliver fuel to petrol stations. The government has already drafted the military to ease pressure on stations. A plan to give out emergency visas has now been extended to the end of February. Penelope Lersch has more.
For 14 years, Joel Gabor lived his life on the road, delivering food, medicine and fuel to the UK, more than 2,000 kilometres from his home in Hungary.
I was staying in the lorry for 3-4 months before I can get home for a week or a 2 weeks holiday, you know. It's really hard for you and hard for the family.
The pandemic and Brexit made a tough job even harder. In 2020, he went home for just 3 weeks. He was stuck at Dover and Calais as the Kent variant of COVID-19 took off. He struggled to leave the cabin, even to shower, with drivers urged to stay inside.
I was there for more than a week, and this whole pandemic thing, it just became crazy. I can tell you that. I have some experience when people say to me, don't go out from the truck because you're driving everywhere around in Europe, you know, and you make us sick.
That was the final straw. Jolt returned to Hungary and started a recruitment company. He has 46 drivers working mostly in Ireland because it's too hard to send them to the UK post-Brexit. Across Eastern and Central Europe, truck drivers are sharing similar stories of how poor pay and conditions pushed them to leave the UK. They say small incentives like short-term visas won't be enough to drive them back. Rihad Shukar says he would return to the job if pay and conditions improved, along with the security of year-long visas.
It's great there. I love doing the job and I would love to go back. But if they don't give us a little bit more, it's not possible.
Jolt believes the UK needs at least 15,000 drivers to solve its shortage, and industry-wide changes like upgrades to truck stops. Long-term solutions that can't be delivered overnight. Penelope Leash, CGTN, Kaposhve.
Your sports news is still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up in sports, Egypt sweep US Open squash titles in Philadelphia.